Most conquerors want your land. Some want your gold. But in the summer of 1014, Emperor Basil II wanted something much more intimate. He wanted your eyes. He didn't just want to win a war. He wanted to perform an industrial-scale surgical strike on the soul of a nation. What happened at the Kleidion Pass wasn't a battle. It was a factory of horror. 14,000 men went into the mountains as soldiers. They came out as a message written in blood, ash, and permanent darkness. This is the story of how one man weaponized human anatomy to erase an empire. The sun did not set on the Kleidion Pass on July 29, 1014. It was extinguished. For decades, the Bulgarian Tsar Samuel had been a thorn in the side of Byzantium. He was a shadow, a ghost, a brilliant tactician who turned the rugged Balkan mountains into a graveyard for Roman legions. He didn't fight like a gentleman. He fought like a man who knew that survival was a zero-sum game. But Basil II was not a man of ghosts. He was a man of systems. He was a man of cold, hard logic. When the Bulgarian army was finally trapped, pinned between a mountain and a calculated maneuver, the fighting was brief. The surrender was total. Nearly 15,000 Bulgarian soldiers stood in the mud. They were tired. They were hungry. But they were alive. In the medieval world, surrender usually meant one of three things: a ransom, a slave market, or a quick death. These men expected the familiar. They expected the predictable cruelty of war. They were wrong. Basil II looked at these 15,000 men and he didn't see human beings. He didn't even see enemies. He saw a logistical problem. If he killed them, he created martyrs. If he enslaved them, he had to feed them. But if he broke them, truly, systematically broke them, he could turn them into a biological weapon. The order was given. It was not a shout of rage. It was a whisper of administration. The Byzantine camp transformed. It was no longer a military outpost. It became a processing center. Huge fires were lit, but not for warmth. Iron rods were brought out, but not for construction. Vinegar was boiled, but not for cooking. The soldiers watched the smoke rise into the summer sky, not yet realizing that this would be the last thing many of them would ever see. This was the beginning of state-sponsored mutilation on a scale the world had never witnessed. Basil was about to apply an aristocratic punishment to a peasant army. In Constantinople, blinding was how you dealt with a rival prince. It was how you removed a man's divine right to rule. By blinding these soldiers, Basil was telling the world that every single one of these men was now a political nothing. He was erasing their status as men, as warriors, and as citizens. The first group of 100 was stepped forward. The guards were ready. The irons were glowing white. The arithmetic of agony had begun. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. The process was not fast. It couldn't be. To destroy the vision of 14,000 men requires a level of bureaucratic discipline that borders on the insane. This wasn't a massacre born of a heat-of-the-moment frenzy. It was a 9-to-5 shift of horror. Basil's engineers didn't just bring swords. They brought a system. They divided the captives into groups of 100. Think about the atmosphere in that valley. The air wasn't filled with the sounds of battle anymore. It was filled with the smell of scorched flesh and the rhythmic, repetitive thud of bodies hitting the ground. Guards were assigned quotas. Executioners were given shifts. If you were a Byzantine soldier that day, your job wasn't to fight, It was to hold a struggling man down while a heated rod of iron was pressed into his sockets. The psychology of the Byzantine soldier changed that day too. They weren't warriors, they were mechanics in a factory of blindness. There is a specific kind of horror in the slow. When an army is slaughtered in a charge, it is over in minutes. Adrenaline masks the pain. But at Kleidion, the men in the back of the line had days to wait. They had days to listen to the screams of the men in front of them. They had days to watch the smoke rise and realize that the darkness was moving toward them, 100 men at a time. This was a psychological spine-breaking. By the time a soldier reached the iron, his spirit had already been extinguished. Basil II watched. He didn't look away. For him, this was a necessary investment in the future of the empire. He understood a fundamental truth of power. The dead are forgotten, but the mutilated are a constant reminder. If he killed these 14,000 men, Bulgaria would eventually birth 14,000 more. But if he sent them home blind, he was creating 14,000 mouths that needed to be fed and 14,000 pairs of hands that could no longer hold a shield. He was weaponizing the survivors. The methods varied. Sometimes it was the hot iron, quick, cauterizing, and absolute. Other times, it was boiling vinegar, designed to seep into the optic nerve and dissolve the connection to the world. It was a medical procedure performed by people who hated the patient. There was no anesthesia. There was only the grip of 4 guards and the inevitable heat. As the sun began to dip behind the mountains each evening, the fires didn't go out. They were stoked for the next day. The Byzantine war machine had become a mutilation machine. The screams became a background noise, like the wind in the trees or the rushing of the Strumshits River. It was a chillingly efficient operation. The emperor was erasing the vision of an entire generation, one eye at a time. By the time the last man in the 100th group was processed, the valley was a different place. It was no longer a battlefield. It was a graveyard for the living. 14,000 men stood in the dirt, their hands reaching out for a world they would never see again. They were waiting for death. But Basil had one final, cruel calculation to make. He wasn't done with them yet. Blinding the men was the preparation. The march was the performance. Basil II knew that 14,000 blind men standing in a valley were a tragedy, but 14,000 blind men wandering through the heart of Bulgaria were a revolution. He needed these men to get home. He needed them to be seen. But a man with no eyes cannot navigate a mountain pass. He cannot find a well. He cannot lead a column through the treacherous Balkan wilderness. So, Basil made a cold, mathematical exception. For every 100 men, he spared one eye. Not one man, one eye. He ordered his executioners to leave every 100th soldier with a single flickering window of sight. This was not an act of mercy. It was the engineering of a delivery system. He wasn't giving them a gift. He was giving them a job. These one-eyed men were now the captains of a ghost fleet. They were the anchors for a long, shuffling serpent of human misery. Imagine the burden of that one-eyed guide. He stands at the front of a line of 99 of his brothers, his friends, his fellow warriors. They are all clutching the belt of the man in front of them. They are weeping. They are stumbling. And he, with his one remaining eye, must look at their mutilated faces every single day. He must lead them through the mud, over the sharp rocks, and across the freezing rivers, knowing that if he fails, they all die in the wilderness. The Byzantines bound them together with ropes. They stripped them of their dignity, their weapons, and their armor. Then, they pointed them west. The march covered 300 kilometers. This wasn't a road. It was a jagged spine of mountains and ravines. The heat of the late summer beat down on open, untreated wounds. There were no bandages. There was no medicine. There was only the arithmetic of the one-eyed. This procession was a slow-moving shockwave. As they moved through the Bulgarian countryside, they didn't need to say a word. The sound of 28,000 feet dragging through the dirt was enough. Farmers dropped their tools. Women stopped their work. They watched as a literal wall of darkness passed by their homes. They saw the Roman performance of power. Basil had turned his prisoners into a biological weapon of economic sabotage. A dead soldier is buried and eventually forgotten. But a blind soldier is a mouth that never stops needing food and a body that can no longer produce it. By sending them back, Basil was bankrupting the Bulgarian state. He was forcing the villages to choose between feeding their children or feeding the broken men who used to protect them. The Bulgar Slayer wasn't just killing soldiers, he was killing the future. He was ensuring that for the next 40 years, every village square in Bulgaria would have a living, breathing monument to Byzantine wrath sitting in the shade, begging for bread. But the most devastating blow was yet to land. This procession had a destination. It was heading straight for the palace of the man who had dared to defy the emperor. As the 14,000 men shuffled through the Balkan passes, they left behind more than just blood. They left behind a trail of historical mysteries that still haunt the records of Kleidion. History often gives us the what and the where, but it rarely gives us the how of such an impossible logistics of pain. Chroniclers like John Skylitzes record the number as 14,000 or 15,000. But think about the physical reality. How does a medieval army, deep in enemy territory, maintain the discipline required to hold down and systematically blind 14,000 screaming men over the course of several days? Where did the fuel for the fires come from in such a localized area? Why did the Bulgarian soldiers, who still outnumbered the executioners in many moments, not rise up in a final, suicidal rebellion when they realized what was happening? Was there a sedative used, or was the psychological shock so total that 14,000 warriors simply waited for the iron like sheep? We are told that 1 man in every 100 was spared a single eye. But how were these men chosen? Was it a random selection, or did the Byzantines specifically pick the youngest, the strongest, or perhaps the most broken to lead the rest? And more importantly, how did these guides find their way? The 300-kilometer journey to Prespar is not a straight line. It is a labyrinth of steep forested slopes and narrow ravines. How did a man with 1 fresh, traumatic wound, leading 99 blind companions, manage to navigate a landscape that even sighted armies struggled to cross? Basil II's army was made up of Christian soldiers. Many of them were seasoned veterans with their own families. Yet, there is no record of a single mutiny. There is no account of a general pleading for mercy. How does a leader turn an entire army into a collective of executioners without a single voice of dissent? Was the fear of Basil II so great that it outweighed the human instinct for pity? What happened to the missing thousands? If 14,000 started the march, how many actually arrived? The journey took weeks. There was no food, no water provided by the captors, and no medical care for infected eye sockets in the sweltering August heat. Did the shuffling serpent leave a trail of thousands of corpses across the mountains? And if so, why does history only focus on the ones who reached the gates of the Tsar? These questions remain unanswered, buried in the mud of the Kleidion Pass. The official chronicles give us a victory. The the reality gives us a ghost story. The death of Tsar Samuel was the final blow, but the funeral of the Bulgarian Empire lasted another 4 years. With the king dead and the army blinded, the nation didn't just lose its defense, it lost its mind. Samuel's heirs, his son Gabriel Radomir and later his cousin Ivan Vladislav, spent more time killing each other for a crumbling throne than they did fighting the Romans. It was a pathetic, bloody scramble for power in a house that was already on fire. Basil II didn't even have to rush. He moved through Bulgaria with the slow, deliberate pace of a man tidying up a room. He dismantled the remaining fortresses one by one. There was no more grand resistance. The will to fight had been replaced by a quiet, hollowed-out despair. In 1018, Emperor Basil II marched triumphantly into the capital of Ohrid. He didn't come as a conqueror of a living nation. He came as the executor of a dead one. He formally annexed the territory, erasing the First Bulgarian Empire from the map. It was a total political erasure. For this cold, systematic destruction, the history books gave him a name that would echo through the centuries: Bulgaroktinos, the Bulgar Slayer. But slayer is a misleading word. A slayer kills with a blade. Basil killed with a system. He proved that an empire doesn't need to be loud to be terrifying. It just needs to be efficient. He used 14,000 human bodies as a canvas to paint a message of absolute Roman dominance. He showed the world that defiance of Constantinople didn't just result in death, it resulted in a life not worth living. The 14,000 men who survived the march lived out their remaining years as living monuments. They sat in the dust of village markets, their hands outstretched for scraps, their empty sockets a permanent warning to any young man who dreamt of glory. They were the ultimate weapon of economic and psychological sabotage. They were a burden that the Bulgarian soil could not support and a memory that the Bulgarian soul could not forget. The darkness of 1014 remains one of the most chilling chapters in human history because it strips away the romance of medieval warfare. It reveals the terrifying arithmetic of power. It shows us a world where human beings were treated as disposable instruments of statecraft. Basil II secured the borders of Byzantium for generations. He brought peace, but it was a peace built on the ashes of 28,000 eyes. He proved that if you want to rule forever, you don't just defeat your enemy on the battlefield. You break their ability to even imagine a future without you. When survival requires living as a deliberate warning, engineered by your conqueror to haunt your own people, is returning home a mercy? Or is it the final, most sophisticated act of torture? The empire secured its borders, but the shadows Basil carved into those mountains are still there. They are the shadows of 14,000 men who went home, but never truly returned. If you enjoy dark untold history, subscribe because we uncover what others won't.